everyone. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Welcome to our FY27 Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Initiative application training. I'm glad to see all of you here. We're going to go through a series of slides. This is being recorded, so we will post it on our website when we're finished. I'm going to give an overview of the BVRI program. Ira Keller, who's here from the Maryland Community Investment Corporation, will talk about how the award payments and disbursements are structured through our partnership with MCIC. And then David, who will lead us through the BVRI application process. I see it says FY26 BVRI application. We mean FY27. I think you know what we mean. And then we'll end with some questions and answers. We will do our best to answer questions that you raise during the call. If we don't have an answer for you today, we will certainly take down the question, and we will be producing a frequently asked questions document, so we'll be sure to follow up. David will say this a few times through today's training, but if you have specific questions about your project or your application, we are hosting office hours. We have a link to sign up with time with David and potentially Ira and me, depending on the question. So no need to ask specific project or application questions that are related to your organization on this call. We'll follow up with those. So with that, David, you can go to the next slide. So briefly, I'll talk about the goals of the BVRI funding program. Those who attended training with us last year or may be a current recipient of BVRI funding know that the main goal of BVRI funding is to expedite the abatement of vacant properties, particularly vacant buildings with city-issued vacant building notices. That is a main goal of BVRI. But we do have other goals for BVRI funding. Something that's probably later down here on the slide. One, of course, major focus of this funding is through the abatement of those vacant properties. We are strengthening neighborhoods and rebuilding neighborhood housing markets. So you'll hear us say a few times as we go through this presentation that the applications for BVRI should present a strategy, a really clear strategy for how your organization will abate vacant properties on clusters of contiguous blocks, so that we are rebuilding housing, stimulating demand in housing, and particularly home ownership in those areas, and rebuilding neighborhood housing markets, strengthening housing markets. We want to support the city's efforts to grow its population and households through the increased production of renovated homes and newly constructed homes on vacant land. We do want to strengthen neighborhood housing values and home ownership wealth, though we always do that through a lens of preventing displacement. We work closely with the private sector to make sure we're leveraging our public dollars through more housing development finance. And ultimately, we are trying to achieve whole block outcomes when every property on a block that we're funding has a productive use. BVRI funding, as I mentioned, is primarily focused on the abatement of vacant properties through redevelopment and ultimately homeownership or rental if homeownership is not an option. But we do work with our BVRI partners, our nonprofit partners, to make sure there's other funding available for legacy residents who live on those blocks. And next slide. Eligible applicants to this round of BVRI are nonprofit community development organizations that have a service area in Baltimore City, whose mission specifically states that they do community development work. Those applicants, those nonprofit CDO applicants, can apply to acquire and develop properties with a for-profit or nonprofit development partner. So if your nonprofit organization doesn't directly develop properties, but you do that through partnerships, that's fine. We support that now, and will in the future. You'll see areas in the application to describe those partnerships. One of the things I want to note, just back to that slide real quick, David, is that the other two recipients of BVRI funding are Baltimore City's Department of Housing and Community Development and the Maryland Stadium Authority. We receive applications from them separately, but we review everything together as a whole. The eligible and priority geographies. So for all of our funding programs within the Neighborhood Revitalization Division, our capital funding programs must be located in what are called sustainable community areas, which I know most of you are familiar with. That's the orange on the map on the screen. For BVRI, the priority geography within the sustainable community areas are the city's designated vacancy reduction priority geographies, or the VRPGs. In this slide, which we'll make sure is on our website, there is a link to the VRPG map, and they're also on Code Map. So you can go into Code Map or into our static map and look more closely to see if your community is located within those VRPGs, and that's the blue area on the map. Again, if you have specific questions about if your community is located in the priority area, those are good questions to have one-on-one with David in one of those office hour calls. Eligible activities. So we provide grants, but primarily loans through MCIC, which Ira will talk about, to finance the acquisition, stabilization, renovation of vacant buildings or new construction on vacant lots. We are redeveloping vacant property. That, of course, can include, in addition to renovation or new construction, acquiring and aggregating vacant lots for the purpose of infill or community managed open space, urgent demolition of properties. Urgent demolition of property might be an allowable activity if that property is in really bad shape and needs to come down quickly. Though we would partner with our colleagues at City DHCD around any urgent demos, or the demolition of vacant buildings for any near-term redevelopment project. So if your organization is working on what will be kind of new construction on vacant land, but there needs to be some demolition of vacant buildings so that project can proceed, we may also fund that. And then, of course, other pre-development activities necessary to complete renovation or new construction projects, specifically architectural and engineering work. As I will say often, the awarded funds can support projects that are on vacant land, but we are continuing to prioritize the renovation of vacant buildings. Application focus. So again, David will walk through the application more specifically, but what we are asking the nonprofit CDO applicants to provide is a really clear strategy for how you will eliminate all vacant property within a cluster of blocks within a neighborhood, and how that strategy for eliminating vacant property will strengthen neighborhoods within that defined target area. We'll continue to focus on scaling the renovation of vacant buildings on those clusters of blocks, vacant buildings, specifically with the city issued vacant building notice. But funds may also support the redevelopment of vacant lots for housing, other mixed use projects, or green space to complement those efforts. I do want to make a note here that when we say renovation of vacant buildings with VBNs, with city issued VBNs, we often think about those as residential properties, row houses, but there are commercial buildings with VBNs on them, often in some of our Main Street districts or other kind of commercial corridors. Those are eligible for funding as well. The strategy is always should support community or build from community strengths and assets and achieve whole block outcomes, as I defined earlier. And then this last point, I really want to note, we have at the department, as I know all of you do too, a real urgency to eliminate vacant property and rebuild neighborhood markets. And we want to work with partners that can really produce redevelopment projects as quickly as possible. That includes partners who are willing and capable to go out into the private market and acquire property that don't need a public acquisition process. There are properties within lots of our neighborhoods where the private sector now, but certainly our nonprofit partners, can be successful tracking down vacant property owners and buying those properties on the private market to expedite that site control. And we're really looking for partnerships like that. Whole block strategy, I'll just briefly talk about this. So I've mentioned that the applications, when you present your strategy for vacant property redevelopment, it should be on clusters of whole blocks. So in the application, we will ask you to identify your block clusters. Where's your target area for vacant property elimination? That cluster should have vacant properties, particularly city issued VBN properties within that block cluster. And we want to know how you're going to abate all of those vacant properties, whether it's land or buildings. Make sure that you read the values and principles from the Baltimore Vacancy Reinvestment Council, which guides the state's investments and city investments into vacancy reduction in Baltimore. As you convey your reinvestment strategy, we want it to be aligned with those values and principles and whole block approach, which we have linked here in the presentation and I have on our website. We'll again ask you to develop a property pipeline with strategies for each property for which you want BVRI funding for redevelopment. I caution you to be very realistic as you submit that property pipeline. I mean, we are interested in a multi-year strategy. We know in some places with lots of vacant property that it may take more than 1 year to abate all of the vacant properties in that area. But I also just caution not to send a property pipeline with like 1,000 vacant properties, all scattered around the city. We are really looking for a concentrated area, a real focus area for your nonprofit to abate vacant properties and a realistic strategy and property pipeline. And then again, you need to demonstrate that our funding will help you complete whole blocks, through our investments and our partnership over the near term, that you will be able to successfully redevelop vacant properties on the blocks in your identified block cluster. Next slide. I think this is my last slide before I hand it over to Ira. The application for FY27 BVRI is open on our website. It closes on April 1st. There are links in this presentation, which we will send out, to our BVRI webpage, which of course you can find also by Googling it, comes right up. And on the webpage, there are lots of resources for you as you complete your application, including that scheduling link I mentioned to schedule a one-on-one meeting with David about your specific project. And I think that's my last slide. I know David mentioned including questions in the chat, and we'll take questions at the end. So from here, I'm going to hand it over to, I believe, Ira.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Carrie. Just by way of introduction, Ira Cowler, Chief Investment Officer at MCIC, the Maryland Community Investment Corporation. I'm also joined here today by Donnell Berry, our loan program manager. Just very briefly, MCIC, we are a state-sponsored community development finance entity. We were created by legislation in 2024 to support the growth of New Markets Tax Credit investment throughout the state of Maryland, and supporting the BVRI work through the lending of BVRI funds to eligible borrowers is a very large portion of that work. So David, if you want to move along to the next slide here. Just wanted to provide for folks a brief overview of kind of how, if you are selected as a BVRI eligible recipient, how program funds get dispersed and what that looks like, because it is a somewhat unique model from kind of traditional DHCD financing. The start of that process is very similar to any other process, right? You will be reviewed, selected, awarded by DHCD, receive a grant agreement from DHCD. That is what allows us to then make loans of BVRI funds to you and to the eligible properties that are identified in your agreement with DHCD. Those funds are provided, as you see here, as partially forgivable loans from MCIC. So you identify your properties, you identify your strategy, we underwrite that, and we provide a forgivable loan. It is a interest-only accrual basis loan that at the end of the current project phase that we have funded is eligible for forgiveness as well. So that forgiveness is based on net sale proceeds from the property and whatever your project appraisal gap looks like. So the intent of the product is to basically help cover that appraisal gap between your construction and total development costs and whatever you're able to sell the property for on the back end. That portion of the funding basically essentially becomes a grant. It is forgiven. There's no payment due on it. And any additional net sale proceeds do get repaid as part of the loan agreement itself and as part of eventual payoff. Happy to dig into that deeper during Q&A. It's a fairly simple process. While we are a lender, it is not kind of the same level of engagement as a traditional lender, let's say, right? We have requirements. They are similar to a traditional lender, but we certainly work to get payments out faster, to get payments out on draw schedules and on reviews that are maybe a slightly more flexible than a traditional lender might be. So happy to dig into that more during Q&A. And then I'll just say kind of traditional loan structures and the way you can think about how BVRI funds come into a project. There are really kind of three ways in the current structure and through the program manual that we have with the state, where those funds get into a project. The first is eligible acquisition and pre-development soft costs, right? So you acquire a BVRI eligible property, as Carrie mentioned, you maybe acquire a property on the private market. You have an open loan with us for acquisition costs on those properties. You send us proof of acquisition, we review that, we make a payment out. Those acquisition funds are forgivable upon proof of acquisition. Next, we also finance construction financing, right? So you have a project, you have a construction financing gap, you send us a budget, we underwrite that, we send you a term sheet, say, great, here's the amount of BVRI funding you can get. We sign that loan agreement, grant draw schedule, you draw down those funds as you work on the project. At the end of the project, when the house is sold, again, we look at net sale proceeds, we look at how much of BVRI funding went into the house, we forgive, and we get repayment on any balance. And then lastly, there might be houses that you are able to do without needing BVRI money in it, right? You have other lines of credit, you have equity, you've completed a house in that way, but you have an appraisal gap on the back end. We can approach the BVRI financing in that way as well, right? So we can look at your total development costs, look at your total sale proceeds, say there was an appraisal gap of 50K on this house, here's $50,000 in BVRI funds, that loan is paid off and forgiven. So yeah, those are the broad strokes. We've been doing this with the 20 FY26 CDO borrowers here for 9 months now. I think we're pretty fluid in the process, and look forward to continuing in 27.
Sweet, thanks, Sarah. So I'll jump in now to the actual application document. I want to sit a little bit on this slide and just talk about kind of the differences between, I see a lot of folks here I know applied in FY26, and kind of the changes we made. The big thing, we really wanted to prioritize ease of accessibility. I think last year this application was a little more clunky and had a lot of components to it. So this year you can go onto the application right now and see it, click work through it. There is no creation of an account or anything like that. It is really just like click on it, look at it. I can't see on our end whether or not you have started an application. So it really is just like a survey response form. And because of that, it does save into your browser, but we have made accessible a pretty extensive Word document template that anyone can use to like fill out beforehand. It also lists all the attachments we're going to need, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So I would recommend, if you haven't already, I know it's been out for a week, going through and just taking a look at the application. There's no like harm, it doesn't affect your submittal in any way, to see if you have any questions. And as Carrie mentioned, feel free to schedule a couple minutes with me to talk through any like specific questions or details that you find in the application. Humorously, I'm looking for somebody to find a typo. Nobody has found one yet. So I will make that edit if you find it. But generally, it is very accessible, but that access allows means that it's a little more. I'm just recommending people work offline on it and then put everything into the application. So let me know if you have any questions as you work through that application template. I'm going to talk for a couple minutes about like the main components of the application, which are similar to last year, the key components. So these are the 4 big things. The last one, these additional project types, we'll talk a little bit more about. And I think Carrie might have something to say about the actual nature of those. But generally, the application, we ask you to, as Carrie mentioned, those clusters of whole blocks. We want you to identify a given area that you are planning to work in, and you want to abate all the vacant buildings within that given area. And I'm literally asking in this application to print out a map, or potentially do it online, draw a box, circle the blocks you're going to be doing, and then so there are blocks outside of it that you won't be working on, there are blocks inside, and then upload that map into the application and submit it to us. And so I'll take that and review it and like check them that it matches with the narrative that you're working through. But generally, we want you to then talk about why you've selected those target blocks, that target area, what sorts of components you made a decision, if you are, you should be working in the target area already. We'd assume that if you're a CDO working in a given area of the city, your target area would then also be within that given area. So we'll also want to hear about the work that you've been doing in that target area already. So then with that, that target area, we'll want you to tell us about what you're planning to do in the future, where you might begin, especially those first like 6 months. So if you are approved for FY27 funding, your funding becomes available on July 1st. And yes, your funding becomes available on July 1st. So we'll want to hear, like, what are you looking to do in the first 6 months of this work? What kind of experience are you bringing into that strategy? So just the general narrative that we're looking for about what you think your vacant revitalization strategy is going to look like.
Mhm.
And then from that vacant strategy, we'll ask you to identify the actual addresses, the actual properties. This is kind of the largest component of the application, and admittedly the one I get the most questions about. You can find a template online that asks you the different addresses, the different addresses you're looking to include, and then a bunch of different information on each of those addresses. And from those addresses, you'll want to give us information about the development plan you have for each address, the timeline you think you can acquire and develop it, and then if you actually are in contact with the owner, if you actually have made that kind of connection, or if you're looking to make that connection later. Okay. So my last component here, then, is additional project types. With the FY27 process, we are looking for project types beyond just the vacant row home redevelopments. And so these are kind of the standard row home that we've been working through with our FY26 groups. But for the FY27 cycle, we're also accepting projects that are first your residential infill new construction. So if, for example, you have a vacant lot on one of the blocks you want to work on, we'll ask you if you are trying to build a new property on that to tell us a bit about that. Similarly, if you have a vacant lot and you want modular infill, we'll ask you to tell us a little bit about that project as well. And then these last two, commercial mixed use and open space, general projects that I know SRP funds have funded in the past. And so we're asking folks for those kind of information. Those kind of projects, again, on your target blocks, if there is a commercial aspect or if there is a vacant lot that you're looking to make into a green space. For these project types, we are asking for a fairly extensive amount of information about the specific project. So one, a narrative about the current project status of those, then a sources and uses budget, and we have templates available in the application, but you can also submit any template you already have. We want to know about who you're partnering with, who you're working with on the project, what kind of experience you or that partner has. And then if you do have those sorts of partners, such as like a private LLC who's working with you on the development, we'd like to know, we'd like to get a support letter, or we require a support letter to demonstrate that partnership. And then lastly, like a sale or rental strategy that we are asking for. Once you do develop this product, how are you going to rent it out? And of course, that's not applicable to the green space. Okay, so that's all I had. So I'll switch to Q&A, and we've got about a half hour. So if anyone has any questions, I'll go off mute and just let it go, but also feel free to put your questions into the chat.
Thank you for sticking around.
This is so shocking. No question.
No, I always assume that if there are no questions, that means I didn't do a good enough job explaining it, because I feel not the inverse. Which, so maybe I can. Here we go. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Is there an expectation of how large the clusters should be? There's not a common expectation. I mean, generally, and you'll see this in some of the whole blocks guidance we provided with the application. We think about a 5x5 block cluster is manageable enough for a CDO to make some impact with the BVRI funding. but also large enough so that when those vacant properties in that cluster of blocks are redeveloped and sold or rented, that it'll help create enough critical mass to move the market. So we use it kind of as a general guide. It's certainly not set in stone. If your organization's working in a bigger area than that, we would just need your organization to demonstrate how you have the capacity to quickly evade vacant properties in a larger area over time, or in phases. If it's in a smaller area than that, then we'd also need to understand how just focusing on maybe one block or two blocks would actually abate enough vacant properties in your area to change market conditions and visibly demonstrate that the neighborhood is changing through the redevelopment of vacant properties. So just keep some of those things in mind as you identify your block cluster. David, anything to add to that?
I know you hit on the capacity thing at the end. I think in your application, connecting the size and the amount of vacants that you're looking to target to the capacity of your organization and your partners. If you've done one vacant rehab, if you've done no vacant rehabs and you're looking to do 300 in the next 2 years, we would probably have some questions about that. So trying to connect those two as much as you can. Jonathan.
Yeah, I mean, is this saying that the boundary of the vacancy reduction priority geography area, one side of the street is in, but the other side of the street is out? If that's the case, we consider both sides of the street as eligible.
And Jasmine, if you have a specific, that's the kind of thing if you wanted to schedule some time to chat about that. Or I think my work cell phone is also available on the BVRI website, which is good too, to give me a call.
I will encourage you to schedule time through the link with David, because you can imagine there's lots of scheduling requests right now. So it would be helpful to do it that way.
Thank you for not telling everyone Nicole called me. That's, yeah.
Any other questions? Feel free to just take yourselves off mute too and ask, is there a per unit cap? Ira, do you want to talk about the per unit cap, how the financing works, and then the subsidy forgiveness?
Yeah, happy to. So I think the critical kind of the first critical piece to understand is the kind of per unit forgiveness, which currently is set at $150,000 per property as kind of the maximum forgiveness amount. We do have the opportunity to go to DHCD for waivers on that. And I'll say in FY26, we have on plenty of instances gone in to expand that cap based on a certain property's underwriting or sales assumptions, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of the way to think about it, is that the subsidy in a particular house is going to max out at 150. Obviously, if your appraisal gap is less than that, your subsidy will be less than that. In terms of investment we can provide, that number is greater and kind of depends on amount of borrowers, flow of borrowers. Currently, we kind of think about it as a maximum active loan capacity from an individual borrower of around $2 million or so, right? We prefer to not be the only funder in a phase, but if we are the only funder in a phase, we will underwrite to that degree and understand that. But again, if you, just to kind of be explicit, you get a loan for $1 million for 4 houses, each house has an appraisal gap of $100,000. That's great. We forgive $400,000 of that loan, and the remaining $600,000, excuse me, needs to be repaid through the sale proceeds from those 4 houses.
Ira, do you want to the acquisition? But I think one of Nicole's questions was, have there been any changes in the FY26 round? And so if you last checked in with us in last April when we were running this, there is a bit of difference.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think to Carrie's point from earlier in the presentation, we do want to encourage folks to get site control of as many properties as possible, increase your kind of scalability, and just also get properties into the hands of folks who are going to do something productive with them. So in line with that, correct, we do have kind of 2 separate loan opportunities for folks that you can have both of them open at the same time. One is that kind of construction financing loan that we will underwrite based on your project, your other sources, et cetera. We also have the ability to open up basically standing $500,000 lines of credit for your acquisition expenses that are not related to that active phase. So a property that is not, you're not planning to rehab in the next 6 months, but that you see it's come on the market, there's a great acquisition opportunity, you can use that line of credit to acquire that property. We will pay that out on acquisition. And then you can move forward with having that property in portfolio, starting the pre-development work on it, etc.
Thanks for the question. So as Carrie said, anyone can also just come off mute. They've got a question. I think this is for you again.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Bob. So we try to lock, you are eligible for a 15% developer fee as part of your BVRI loans. We try to lock everyone into that 15% fee. And if we're talking about a construction financing model, we can actually prorate out that payment on every draw in your draw schedules. I will say, if you are kind of bumping up against that $150,000 forgiveness cap, you know, playing around with that developer fee and both the structure of the payment and the amount of it is kind of the first order of business to try and get you the maximum subsidy without kind of going over the what the property and the project can handle. But yes, there's a 15% developer fee. We try and lock everyone into that, and we try to, again, pay that out pro rata on every one of your draws. Excuse me.
I refer you again. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. So we don't have to pay out on a reimbursement basis. We can pay out on invoices. We need proof that those were paid before your next draw, obviously. But yes, certainly we can process, especially soft costs on invoices, including acquisition, right? We can pay out acquisition based on, you know, draft final HUD ones and whatnot. And then you just need to provide us proof that you actually went to settlement and acquired said property. I forget I always end up being the most popular person at these calls.
Think of yourself more as the giving tree, Ira. Okay. Okay, so I think if that's all the questions we have, this recording will be up online. I think I can send, you know what, I'm going to put this presentation up on our website. So instead of like trying to get everyone's emails and send that out. So you go look at that. I am going to correct a few typos that I saw along the way. So it will be slightly different. But yes, so we'll have this presentation up. We'll have all those resources we discussed already up. Take a look at the application, schedule some time with us to talk about it. Application deadline is midnight of April 1st. I will be pressing a button that says close application at that time. So please get it in. Please get it in days before that. Don't wait till the last minute. But otherwise, appreciate everyone's time today.